Can we start from there?
Change is hard. Being true to oneself is hard. Asking for what you want is hard.
Say more.
It's uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar.
Very interesting. So what you're really saying is that the grounding at home.
I didn't need validation externally, ever. The only place for validation was inside of me, and what I call unconditional self-love. That staying small is an act of self-betrayal, because we don't believe that we're enough. So I had a choice to make really young. I can either collapse into feeling embarrassed or in some way ashamed of my outer image and not let anybody know what my inner world was all about, or I could do the opposite of that.
For nearly 3 decades, Janet has been at the forefront of coaching and leadership development, guiding leaders to transform their organizations and themselves. With over 12,000 hours of coaching experience, her mission has always been clear: to empower leaders to build trust, foster collaboration, and inspire cultures where people love their life's work. As the CEO of Invite Change, she leads a global team of practitioners dedicated to equipping leaders with the tools and mindsets needed to meet today's challenge. Welcome, Janet, for today's conversation on the episode of I'm the Change. Hello. Welcome, Janet, to this very first episode of I'm the Change. How are you feeling today?
Wonderful, and delighted to be with you.
Great. And as you know, we are starting this series of I'm the Change to bring stories of change maybe a lot of world has not heard about, especially the coaches who have to go through a lot of internal change to show up in this world, to be in their roles. And I see one of very inspiring figure. That's you. And I want to hear your story today, Janet. I have thought about it several times to ask, but I never asked. And I don't know why I never asked.
That's an interesting question for us to be in, huh?
Absolutely. We can keep that conversation for some time. But yeah, I think our internal dialogues keep us away. But today I want to really invite you to this conversation about the change. And what's your personal change story? Can we start from there?
Sure. I know that many people in the world have a relationship to change that is uncomfortable. That's a neutral term, right? Probably goes along a spectrum of scared to death, terrified of it, paralyzed to change, and others who like the adrenaline rush of the risk they associate with change. I'm not even on that spectrum.
Say more.
I'm not sure I know exactly why, other than, so I grew up in the middle of the United States, in a state called Missouri. I am the youngest of 4 children, all older brothers. And both of my parents were working parents, not stay-at-home parents. So I had a lot of independence early on. And my parents made a decision when I was born with a birthmark on my face that they were not going to hold the birthmark as making me different in any way. It was this kind of treat her as one and the same. And of course, that worked for a little while until I was out in the world and on my own, like going to kindergarten the first day and recognizing, wait a minute, I didn't look like everybody else, and it made others uncomfortable. So I had a choice to make really young. I can either collapse into feeling embarrassed or in some way ashamed of my outer image and not let anybody know what my inner world was all about, or I could do the opposite of that, and the opposite is what I chose. So change was something that really started very early for me, and I realized that I always was at choice. So if there were people that were bullying me, well, then those were people I wasn't going to hang out with.
Hmm.
And I would stand my ground with them. And I found friends would do the same thing on my behalf. I have people to
It,
this day who look at me and say, I don't even see your birthmark. Like it just doesn't even enter into my consciousness unless we're walking down the street and somebody comments about it, which does happen on a pretty regular basis. So it's early
Interesting.
beginnings, really, that I have this very optimistic relationship with change.
Very interesting. So, what you're really saying is that the grounding at home was, the soil was ready
Yeah.
to look at things very differently, right? The what you're
Yeah,
saying, internal and external, was actually at home.
it started there. But here's the thing. Uh, in your questions that you sent me ahead of time, I also noticed you were saying, and what's your personal change story now? And I want to say something about that because how I've related to that early grounding has changed dramatically. So when I do things like lifeline reflection, where I let myself think about each decade of my life and what were some of the seminal moments, I can remember being really angry that my parents treated me as one and the same. It's like, but I'm not. I am my own unique expression. And I think I spent a great deal of my life proving to the world that I was. So here the looking for the world to validate me. And the more I did that, the more people saw me as ambitious, which was the opposite of my value system, which is generosity. So I figured out that didn't work either. So in some ways, I felt like my parents, well, yes, it grounded me. It also was a lie. And I tried to break the lie up, but I didn't really have the skill yet to do it. So when I began to have the experience of people seeing me as ambitious, which did not match at all with my inner uh, perspective, I then started another journey. Huh, what is another way for me to be in my full expression and be attracting rather than repelling, which was what was going on. And of course, it was in both my personal and my professional life. And that's the beginning of the inner journey that you were talking about, that I began to understand that I didn't need validation externally, ever. That the only
Hmm.
place for validation was inside of me and what I call unconditional self-love. I think that's the lifelong journey. And what it calls for is different in every decade of my life. And I'm in a brand new one as I'm in my, I turned 65 last year. I don't feel 65. That's just insane to me. I'm like, what? And there is a wisdom that comes with more life experience. And I
Right.
think we're in continuous change.
Absolutely. So, what I'm also hearing is that maybe the internal grounding at home was very grounding. It needed a different change journey externally to be, irrespective of whether internal was strong or external was strong, there was a sync required in this world.
Yeah.
And when do you remember that those moments when you had to make those transitions? What made you say the sync is required now, irrespective?
Oh, let's see. So I was very athletic as a kid. And I remember my parents, I was a figure skater, and my parents were approached by my coach to suggest that I could make it to the Olympics, but I would need to be homeschooled or a tutor, and that I really needed to train 365 days a year. And my father did something very strange. He publicly was very proud to this, but privately said, "No way are you doing that." That was his way of coping with the discomfort. And my mother said to me, you really are good and you're not competitive enough. You'll never make it. I, both of those things at the same time. And I think I was 12. And I realized that there it was early on. This, I would be intimidating. And yet I actually internally didn't have the structure to hold it.
Wow.
And
Hmm. Hmm.
so I learned about betrayal. I learned about how people judge. And both of those lessons helped me actually develop what I think is my high value for generosity, that everyone has a right to the expression of who they are in their lives. And that's basic dignity of human beings. I don't think my parents had any idea the impact they were having on me.
I'm sure they were thinking that everything is positive here.
Yes.
And I think that's a very parental way of thinking of any parent. Every parents think that they're doing everything right for their child.
Yeah.
And how it sinks inside, we don't know,
Hmm.
right, based on how we're consuming it. You spoke about betrayal, Janet. Can you talk more about that emotion? What betrayal are you talking about?
I think that the betrayal fundamentally is mine, of me, right? Every time I found myself pursuing something because it seemed it is what others expected of me, I always did more than was asked of me and then would feel some resentment to it if it wasn't received or acknowledged.
Was
Um,
that your coping mechanism? Was that your
you know, it,
mechanism to deal with the world?
it could be, but I also have a lot of capacity. So it was easy for me to do more than was asked of me. But the emotional toll of that was really how I learned about change. And to your question about why does the company get called Invite Change? That's why. The shift in my thinking was rather than changing myself to fit with what was expected outside of me, I began to understand that I have an authority internally. And when I listen to my deeper wisdom, I make choices that are healthy for me, and I create relationships that are healthy for me. And I don't create the ones that aren't. But that's a level of internal responsibility that came with seeing the consequence of making decisions that were really a betrayal of my own value system and the core of who I am.
Hmm. So what I'm hearing is the wisdom was available right in the childhood.
Yes, it was. I couldn't
So
apply it yet, but it was there. In reflection, I
it
could.
was there. It
Yeah.
was there. Irrespective. So where was the intentional, voluntary change started?
Mm.
Because it seems that the ground was ready. It seems very natural. Where was the effort?
I I spent 14 years as an officer in a financial services company here in the United States. And about 8 years in, I had this one colleague that I'd started with at the same year we
Hmm.
entered the organization, and we were peers at this point. Both having pretty big jobs, and she started doing human potential work, which I knew nothing about. Like my whole life was professional.
Hmm.
And so one day she takes me to lunch and she says, I think it would be wonderful for you to experience this workshop. It's really made a huge difference for me. And she enrolls me for this 3-day weekend. Well, I walked into this big, huge hall. There were, I don't know, maybe 70 people, and we're all sitting in this big circle. It was a very transformative moment for me because I really hadn't spent any time at all thinking about what did I care about? What mattered to me? Who were the people that mattered to me? How did I become who I became? So, as coaches, we talk about reflection like we think everybody knows what that is. How I learned about reflection was as an athlete, imagining how I was going to skate to that particular piece of music before I stepped onto the ice, right? It was a very practical reflection. But what I started to learn in the human potential work was reflecting on the experience I was having emotionally and physically as I walked through my life, and realizing that I could replay that tape anytime. And I had a responsibility to remember the experiences that were not uh, respectful and honoring of myself, that I had to choose and learn to choose wisely, not reactively, just because something seemed like a shining opportunity. I had to learn discernment. So reflection for the benefit of discernment in order to make better choices for myself. And that's really the roots of Invite Change.
Hmm. So you're telling me you were born coach.
Maybe.
Talk to me about some of the frustrating moments about, being wise and being understood, and or being able to discern and being able to think very effortlessly. What are some of the moments that really frustrate you about change? And I'm sure we all have those.
Oh, of course. And it's what we want, right?
Hmm.
All of us are looking to have the freedom to express all of who we are, whether we say it out loud or not. That's the human condition. Some people have the expression through the arts. Some people do it through writing or singing or public speaking or hosting a podcast or coaching, right? We
Hmm.
all find our platform that allows more of us to be accessible to more people in the world. So along the way, we hit speed bumps. So we do things that are like, oh, this is so not for me. But the story that's popping to mind as you ask the question, I had a boss who came up to me one day and he said, you do realize that you are like off the chart smart? And I just looked at him and I said, thank you. Uh, and he said, and you realize that's kind of intimidating for people around you. And I said, certainly not my intent. And I understand that sometimes that's true. But can I let you in on a little secret? And he said, sure. And I said, well, the truth is, what I am is highly intuitive, but I live in a world that requires analysis and justification. So I have learned how to do analysis and rationale building so that my intuitive idea, my answer that is way out ahead of everybody else, actually feels like it's timely and supported by how others need to receive it. I thought that was like an incredibly important thing for him to know. He was angry. What I had done and basically burst his whole bubble around who he thought I was and what he was attempting to communicate to me with that feedback. He
Well,
sought
that's,
pushback.
yeah, I mean, that's a very wise insight, really, that we find it hard to articulate to the world as to who I am inside and what are the gifts I'm bringing, and then really think it with the world outside so that I can be considered normal.
Yes, exactly. And I realize I'm not normal. I
Of
actually don't even know what normal means anymore because there's so many
right.
extraordinary people in the world because of their uniqueness. And I think this is why I have such a passion for coaching, because we give people an opportunity to come back home to self and to find that place of unconditional self love.
True. However, and I'm right now, I totally understand and agree to your point of view, but I'm also right now contemplating with a view that actually that's a hard part to play, to come home and to be to living with self-love, especially if you're in jobs, is hard to do unless you're doing your own work and you're your own boss. It's very hard to be home and operating from your own principles.
Maybe. Um, I I think a lot about this language that I
Hmm.
hear from many people, not just from you. It's not the first time. Change is hard. Being true to oneself is hard. Asking for what you want is hard. Consistently being in alignment with oneself is hard. Well, I think we're feeding ourselves some self-talk with that. If what we
Certainly.
mean when we translate that is it's uncomfortable, it's unfamiliar, it's uncertain, it asks us to take risk, all of which means we must trust that what we sense and experience is real as something that's tried and true in our history, because it's our natural creative force. Now, actually, we're talking about something a little more tangible, where people
Hmm.
aren't caught in the barrier of it's hard, but they're starting to recognize, wait a minute, I do have internal capability. if for no other thing than to imagine it, right? This is collage work. Right? When we sit down in a workshop and look at images in order to create a vision board, that's an act of creativity before we have to take the risk that gets us connected to inspiration. And inspiration starts to fuel the ability to say, wait a minute, if I can imagine it, maybe there's a step I can take towards it. In many ways, this is what coaching provides, is that quiet moment for a half an hour or an hour when the world can be put on pause and I can begin to accept that I have capacity to produce the life experience that I want. It might take a lifetime for it to manifest, but that idea came out of me, which means I can walk towards it.
True. And I do now see, and obviously, culture plays a big role. When we talk about conditions in India or this part of the world, we see that, or I can talk about myself, that journey is only possible when you choose to be on it and not when you are in a survival mode.
Well, isn't survival the same thing? And I spent some time with some young leaders in Africa last month, and one of the things we were talking about is if you say something that's incongruent with the prevailing attitude or mindset of the boss above you, it's really easy to be shut out from the information necessary to be successful in the role. And of course, salaries and conditions are not very positive in the continent in most places. So I said, so what is the way you cope with that? And they said, well, we talk to each other. Okay. And what about the actions you take? Well, we take the action without saying anything. And what about the results you produce? Well, we're producing the results that they're satisfied with. Okay, so where's the disconnect? We don't get acknowledged for it. They don't understand what it is we're actually doing. And I said, and where could that acknowledgement come from? And they were quiet. And then they kind of looked at each other and went, well, I guess we're doing it for each other. And I think this is it. This is what happens in refugee camps, right? The families come together and they figure out who's going to go to the truck when it pulls in and make sure we get the bread or we get the water, whatever we need. I don't mean in any way to diminish how horrific the conditions are, but that's an act of volition that says, I choose living, not dying.
Okay, so this is becoming more interesting. What I'm now understanding and hearing from you is, while change is voluntary, it's very much part of survival if we choose to be. We choose to live in tandem with each other and we support each other like a community and do not really base our growth on validation.
Yes. I think
That's
it's one of the
very,
key
it's
steps. One of
very,
the very key steps.
very key step. So then, which we are also saying that when I'm in a survival mode, I have two choices. One, I can continue living on validation, which is a moving target, or I can live like a community, support each other, and still satisfy myself and still grow without maybe that official badge on my shoulder.
And we begin to question what the official badge means and realize that it's meaningless when we are at home in ourselves. So, this is what happens in a family. We always joke about, can you ever go home for Christmas or in the US, Thanksgiving or, some major holiday? I'm sure this happens all over the world. And have your parents see you as anything other than the child you were when you left the house. Right? And the answer is yes, but it requires that we give ourselves permission to be the adult we've become and allow our parents to see the adult we've become. So this journey of self-acceptance then gets tested when we put ourselves back into those formative relationships. This is couples who get divorced, who see each other 10 years later and realize, why
Hmm.
did we make it so hard on ourselves? We can be friends now. I don't have the romantic attraction anymore, but you're an amazing human being, and it was a good thing when we were together. This is what happens, that individuation of self-acceptance. I don't need validation from my former partner to feel like a good human being.
Yeah, I think that time we are fighting with a lot of emotional clouds and smoke and whatnot,
Yeah.
maybe. So I want to change gears here, Janet, and really talk about coaches in the world, right? I train coaches, you train coaches, and time and again, what I notice is in spite of their coaching journeys, in spite of working so much on themselves, they keep themselves small, and that hurts me.
Mm,
There is all the power, all the tools they have to shine. They have everything, and I have seen my journey, and I see others' journey as well. I see they doubt themselves,
mm.
and that journey is very hurtful, at least for me as an educator. What's some of the advice you can give them?
So there's a couple of things that come to mind pretty consistently for me. One is that I think I'm going to call it right sizing, and I don't mean right and wrong, right? I'm not dualistic about this at all. So finding the simple daily experience that we find inspiring, motivating, stimulating, activating, and have that be enough. Because you see, holding oneself small suggests there's an external standard that I'm evaluating myself versus. That this way I'm being is small relative to an external standard that I
It's a good
perceive
thing.
as big and out of reach for me.
Hmm.
Neither one is true. There is whatever is. And if my choices are producing something that I feel delighted by, excellent, keep doing it. If my choices are providing an experience I'm not delighted by, then I have an opportunity to reflect and ask those questions. And what I notice, particularly with coaches who are new on the journey, they've done their training and they're super excited about it and they've gotten good feedback on their demonstration and they're building their confidence. And the first time somebody says, tell me what it would look like to partner with you, they can't get the words out of their mouth,
I know
right?
what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yes.
you and I have seen this.
Hmm.
And I
We've
and I
been
have
through that. Yeah.
yes.
Been
And
through that.
I
Yes.
said to students, who did you talk to? And they said, a perfect stranger. And I said, okay, when you decided to go to coaching education, to pick a school and start training, how did you choose it? Oh, I made lots of phone calls. I did all kinds of interviews. I did lots of research. I talked to graduates. I talked to the faculty. All right. What are you realizing out of that experience? That was relationship building. Hmm. I said, so you're asking a perfect stranger to pay you to be in a relationship for 6 months to do vulnerable work with them. Vulnerable because it's about learning, growth, and change. All coaching is, right? Right.
Right.
So, this is one facet of it. Like, remember, we're building relationships in the intimacy of people's lives. And I don't mean sexual at all. The word can be broken down into me, see. That's
Hmm.
really what it means.
Into me, see. Hmm.
Right? Will we allow someone to see us? And we are creating the conditions, the situations, the dialogue that allows a person to say to themselves, this person, Jaya, she's available to take what I want to dish out and talk about. And nobody else in my life is.
Hmm.
This is why every conversation we have as coaches at the Easter brunch, at the rally for your political party, at the alma mater that you went to an event for, every place you show up in the world, you are radiating your essence, your authenticity, your passion for the profession that you've chosen. And you may never know when it comes back to you, but it always
Hmm.
will. And I
Goes back to inner work, goes back to presence, goes back to, walk the dog, goes back to, apply everything that you've learned.
so now go back to the right sizing with that. So they remember, okay, who I am is how I will coach and build my practice. And 100 hours is the first goal. All right. Find 5 people in your life who absolutely adore you. You recognize them as lifelong learners. They are so delighted to support you in anything you ever ask them to do. And they're very invested in growing in their own lives. Invite them. Invite
Hmm.
them to work with you. Fine if you don't want to charge them the full rate you think you're gonna have. That's fine. You're at the beginning. These are people that will work with you because they love you. Make your list of the next 10 people, not your family. You're too invested in what decisions they make. You want to be with people that will make their own choices. Pick the next 10 and invite them to your home for a barbecue to tell them a little bit about how you've benefited from having a coach and what you have seen the 5 people you worked with benefit from engaging in a coaching partnership. You're not enrolling them at this event. You're not asking them to work with you, but you are educating and informing. I don't know why we think people think they know what coaching is. It's ridiculous. But we make this assumption that they know. Hey, would you like to work with me as your coach?
Yeah.
We'll get what kind of coaching? And I'll say to
Yeah.
them, humans, making humans better humans.
Yeah, that reminds me of a very funny incident that I was on a solo vacation in Goa and I was walking on the shore and a guy comes and said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a life coach." He said, "The ones who save life in the sea."
Mm,
And I was like, "Yeah, we save lives, but in a different way." And that's very interesting to know how people relate to coaching or not. Really, coaching is still a very new profession in the world, and there
yes.
is a need of education. And and
And
we are
so
trying. Sorry.
let me just fix one thing and then we'll come. I want to pick up your thread so that they get the full map here.
Yeah.
So with that next 10 and you've had your event, some number of those are going to call you
Hmm.
and say, hey, I'd like to do that too. It only takes 10 people
Hmm.
and you do 10 hours a month, and in 10 months, you have hit your goal. This is right sizing. Break it down. Keep it simple. You have to begin somewhere, and it's too soon to identify who your ideal client is. If you really think you want to coach billionaires, then the key is proximity. Are they in your circle of people now? And if they're not, where will you put yourself in the place of best potential? If you really have your heart set on working with people who are billionaires, then you got to show up where billionaires show up. Can't do that tomorrow? Okay. When will you be able to do that? What would be necessary in your life in order to have that opportunity? We think it's so far out of reach. We think so big that we forget that the opportunity is right in front of us. Next decision,
Yes.
next choice, next day, next week, next month.
Yeah.
And stay steady with that.
I so much agree with you that we think it's very far, but actually a lot of goals are very near. It's just that maybe we are buying time to say it's far because we're not ready or we don't want to show up, we don't have courage, or something like that. We are telling ourselves it's far because then that gives me time to
Right?
hold
And that's
on.
the stay small you were talking about. So
Exactly. That's the stay small. That's the stay small because opportunities, being an entrepreneur or being a coach, you create opportunities. You don't wait for them.
that's right. And so do you see, we're back full circle to betrayal.
Yeah.
That staying small is an
Ah,
act of self-betrayal because we don't believe that we're enough. And this is a core shadow belief in all human beings. I don't matter. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. And that redemption of those shadow beliefs and the acceptance of self, that is the life journey of humans, and it is how coaches contribute. It's very difficult to do at a more sophisticated level until one has done that inner work.
Interesting. So what I'm also, and I totally admit that I had to do that work for myself and I'm still doing it, that if I have to only work on one goal, that is to really make myself believe that I'm worth it. And there is no other way. I mean, you just have to show up to difficult tasks, to challenges, to push yourself, to stretch yourself, whatever it takes, you need to show up for your own self.
Right. That's right.
And what I'm hearing you say is that's exactly the work needs to be done day in, day out. And then the goals are not very far.
Right. And it doesn't matter if you're a neurosurgeon or a lawyer or a politician or a house cleaner or a professor or, a kindergarten teacher. I mean, it doesn't matter what you've chosen as your vocation. At the end of the day, it's your humanity that matters. How will I choose to show up today? I can either show up as less than and pull back and feel the dissatisfaction in my life that comes with that, or I can take a small step. It might be as simple as sit with somebody you've never sat with before to have lunch. That might be the first step that says, this person didn't reject me. We sat, we had lunch together. This person told a joke. I told a little story. We had a good moment. And maybe that's enough. Tomorrow, I'll sit with another person who's a stranger. So when I say right size, that's what I mean. Like, don't think you have to be this person you've put on a pedestal. That might be an aspiration. Don't even put a timeline on it. If that's an aspiration, great. What in myself will I choose to now embody? That gets me a little closer. Let me go experiment with that.
So what I'm realizing is the self-sabotaging conversation that we all do with ourselves. The narrative is, why will that person give me time? Who am I? How, why will they respond to my email? Or I did send an email and it didn't come back. They must be busy. She must be busy. They may not have time. She is very successful. They are very successful. And we keep playing small with those narratives, self-sabotaging narratives.
Yep.
Yeah, I see that. I totally see that. Great. So, Janet, I think I can have conversations with you like for hours and hours. And I so enjoy taking out branches of what you say and interpreting that. But I do realize we have a timeline on this podcast. So how do we, when we are closing this conversation, what are few daily advices would you like to leave coaches with, especially? How can they start playing big? Very simple stuff.
Yeah, really simple stuff. I mean, I think one that's very top of mind for me is make sure once a day you spend at least 5 minutes in some selfish activity. For me, it's standing outside in silence, in the sunshine, sometimes in the rain, on our property here where I live, right? I go lean against a tree. 5 minutes, it's my time, nobody interrupts me. It is a completely selfish act to separate from all the other busyness of my life. Sometimes I get more than 5 minutes. Sometimes I am deliberate. So that's my second thing. Choose something to be deliberate about and guard it selfishly. So there is an hour that's on my schedule. I won't even tell you what day of the week it is because you're going to try to get it. You won't get it. But there is an hour when I use that time to listen to something, read something, watch something that's totally out of what I'm already working on. Right? It's the way I stimulate my creativity. For example, one of these days I'm going to learn how to throw a pot. I think pottery and working with clay is like one of the most, it's the closest thing to what I also love, which is digging in the dirt and pulling weeds. but I make an hour every week that I do that. It's deliberately choosing to do something that is activating my creativity that doesn't happen in my regular day to day. Just to keep it fresh, keep it a little different.
Mm.
The other thing that I do is a practice of laughing. Seriously, like I could get just a little too serious, and finding the moments in the day to realize, you know what, it's just really not as big a deal as I'm making it. And I have, a set of friends who I know I can rely on to call on the phone and go, okay, tell me something funny. Usually does what I just did. It causes us to start laughing. And then something funny does show up, and now I've got the endorphins going in my body, and I'm like, okay, all right, perspective, I have it now.
Very interesting. So 5 minutes for your own self, selfishly, stand in the rain, stand in the sunshine, do whatever, but just 5 minutes only for yourself and nobody disturbs you. Then an hour at least in a week, which is you're doing something which you normally do not do, something, and I call it like stimulate your other senses, especially the touch, which, in our work, we generally talk and we are so much in our head, we hardly, tactile stuff is missing. And the third one you said is just laugh. And that's so profound. I realized when I started doing coaching work, it was such a serious work that I started, and I'm anyway a very, I look like a serious personality. So it started embodying so much in me that I stopped laughing. And I realized how much there is a need for entertainment and how much there is a need to do normal stuff like watch TV, which I've started watching now. I've actually put a TV in my bedroom to say, I'm going to watch TV, and I've done enough of work to be able to, take out an hour for myself every day. Why not? And I've realized that how being a serious child it has come with a lot of difficulty. I used to feel apologetic wasting time, and I know a lot of us do that because we have been raised up with the value of responsibility. Don't waste time. TV is a waste of time. Your eyes will go bad. All those inner voices have actually, captivated at least me for a long bit of time. And I realized how it impacts us when we become coaches.
We take ourselves a little seriously.
Too seriously, it seems.
No, and so do our clients then, right? Our clients
So,
come taking themselves seriously and trying to please us as coach. Oh,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
moment when we realize, okay, is that really what I want to be embodying and modeling? And the answer is no.
Yeah,
So,
and then role of humor is so important in our work, which I don't think we are being taught, but I think an opportunity to um, really see. But I don't know if somebody can teach us humor, or we need to be humorous. That's for some other time. But Janet, thank you. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure I'm coming back for more episodes because I'm not done yet. And this is fun. Thank you so much for all your energy, your time, and your wisdom. And thank you. You are the change. Do you think you are the change?
thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.